Goodness and mercy chased me this week. I love that idea that you can't get away from it. God's chasing you down. So I was at Cannon Beach at the annual prayer summit. Matt's been there, I think, a couple times maybe. And this is a gathering of pastors and ministry leaders from Sweet Home to Philomath, this region. And the first thing that happened was we were meeting in a small group and praying for one another. And my good friend, another pastor, prayed for me. And what he said afterwards was, he said, "You're using your perfectionism to heal your shame." And it just like, oh my goodness, you got that right. He knows me and we've shared and stuff like that. But it was just like, I need to really process this because he really nailed it on the head. And so at that point, I thought, this has been a great summit. This was Tuesday morning, and it goes through Wednesday, into Wednesday. And I thought, I've got what I need from this. This has been great. But God wasn't through. His goodness kept chasing me. So that evening, as we were meeting together, about 80 people, the topic was division that we were praying about, and particularly maybe political division. And there were some prayers. It was okay. And then at the end of that season, God started stirring my heart, not just prompting me to pray, but urging me to pray. But they moved on from confession into something else. And as I sat there, I thought of two things. I don't want to interrupt. We're through with the confession. And I also don't want to confess what I want to confess because people will judge me. So those two things were in my head, but I was just compelled by the Holy Spirit to interrupt and say, can we go back to confession? I have a confession to make. And what it was about was really my judging people with a different political view. And I won't go any more into that because I don't want to distract you by getting you to think about people. But whoops, that just did it. Oh well, I just did distract you. Anyway, it was hard to do. It was very personal and very vulnerable. And after I did it, they moved on from there. There wasn't, oftentimes when God does something like that, it's contagious and it sets off a whole string of similar confessions. It didn't do that, which was fine. That wasn't my point. I just wanted to obey. I felt good. And then I left the meeting, not because I was upset, but my daughter had called and I've been wanting to connect more with one of my daughters. And so, and I'm early to bed, she's early to bed. So I left. And some people noticed that I prayed this prayer of confession and walked out. Not immediately, but so later that night, I'm sound asleep and my phone rings and I get 4 messages on my phone. And they're saying, thank you so much. There was a man that came up to the person who was leading the meeting and said, we've missed it. We need to go back to confession. And there was a deep season of repentance, which I didn't get to see, but reminded me of a lot of things. And one is when God puts something on your heart, do it. Have the courage to do it. And then, that's not all. Somebody was there that I've had struggles with, and we've had several conversations about it. And I just wasn't feeling 100% clean in that relationship. That was one of the people that contacted me in the night and affirmed their love and support and respect for me. It was just what I needed to hear. And God did it. I went into this summit not really intending to meet with this person because we've met so many times. I don't want to wear him out. And God did it anyway. And God took care of it. So I am just marveling at the goodness of God, the power of God. And all this leads to me saying to myself, if we've got a God that can act so powerfully in my life, I can rest through trusting him, which is our topic today, rest. So we're going to talk about 4 elements of rest. Number 1, resting from trying to earn God's favor, which is at the heart of the Christian life, the grace of God, right? Number 2, rest as we serve, rest while you work. And number 3, inner rest. And number 4, rest from work. So those are all scriptural concepts. All I'm drawing from Matthew 11, 28 to 30. I want you to notice what Jesus said about rest here. So this is Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So if we listen to that in the Amplified Version, it gives us a really good hint as to what kind of rest Jesus primarily had in mind here. Listen to the Amplified, and you can't tell in the Amplified exactly. Well, never mind that part. Okay. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened by religious rituals that provide no peace, and I will give you rest, refreshing your souls with salvation. So Jesus primarily has in mind rest for your soul through him in salvation. Now, the Jewish leaders were laying heavy burdens on the people. For example, they had 39 separate rules concerning the work that you could and could not do on the Sabbath day. For example, you could spit on a rock. Isn't that good to know? You can spit on a rock on the Sabbath according to their rules, but you can't spit on the ground because that's cultivating the soil and that's work. That could bring a crop forth, right? Or help bring a crop forth. Here's another one. You can't carry an orange on the Sabbath. That is bearing a burden. That's too much work. But if you cut the orange in half, that's okay. Can't carry it in your pocket, though, but you can cut it in half. So there were all these rules that bound the people up, and those are a couple ridiculous examples. But here's the good news. A relationship with Jesus is based on a relationship, not on rule following. Yes, he has standards. We cannot earn our right standing with God by being good enough. Listen to this quote from Muhammad Ali. He got some things right, but he's got something terribly wrong. This was back, Reader's Digest several years ago, as you know Muhammad Ali from his name. If nothing else, he was Muslim. He says, when he was asked what his faith meant to him, he said, it means a ticket to heaven. One day we're all going to die and God's going to judge us, our good and bad deeds. So far, that's all true. If the bad outweighs the good, you go to hell. If the good outweighs the bad, you go to heaven. I'm thinking about the judgment day and how you treat people wherever you go. Help somebody through charity, because when you do, it's been recorded. I go to parties. I see good-looking girls. I take a box of matches with me. I see a girl I want to flirt with, which is sin. So I light my matches. He touches his finger. Ooh, hell hurts worse than this. Buy a box of matches and carry them with you. Put one on your finger and see how long you can hold it. Just imagine that's going to be hell. Hell's hotter and all for all eternity. Now, like I say, some of what he said was true, but there is no rest in trying to work your way to salvation, because when is it good enough? Is it 51% good, 49% evil? And can you get that wrong? That's why there's rest in Christ in terms of being saved. I tell people sometimes, said this a lot on the street, talking to people about the gospel, doing gospel surveys, I say, I'm disqualified from heaven. And they don't really know me, but they go, who's this religious guy talking to me? They're shocked, like, what? You're disqualified from heaven? Yes, I'm disqualified from heaven, but Jesus qualified me by what he did. So as this song by Casting Crowns says, not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. That beautifully summarizes the grace message of salvation. So are you experiencing this rest in Christ that comes from knowing that He did the work that earns my right standing with God and my favor with God. I can't earn it. I didn't earn it. He earned it for me. So where do good works come in? They are an outgrowth of this beautiful relationship that I have with Christ. They have a place. Absolutely, they have a place. They just don't earn me salvation. So let the issue be settled. The work is finished by Christ that puts you in right standing with God. And out of gratitude for that right standing, we work. All right, so that's the first aspect of rest, is rest from trying to earn our way, which I think, I don't know about you, but I fall into that. Like trying to earn his favor. Am I good enough? And I need to remember what these central points of the gospel are to remind me, quit striving to get God's favor. That's not it. Then there's rest in work or in serving the Lord. Notice the word yoke here as I read this again. Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, yokes were put on the necks of animals so that they could pull a plow. It made the work possible and it took away the strain at the same time. So, knowing Jesus is work, but he reduces the strain because he's pulling with you, could say. I want you to think about walking versus riding a bicycle. So when we walk, I take a step, and then I stop unless I put new energy into a next step, right? There's no momentum unless I'm going downhill. There's no momentum to keep carrying me on. It's all my effort with each step. But when I ride a bicycle and I pedal for a while and I stop pedaling, I still go, right? It's very efficient. There's extra energy beyond me there. And that's how it is with serving the Lord and working for the Lord. It is his energy working through me. Doesn't mean it isn't work. It is work. And there's my energy too, in a sense, but what a big difference it is to depend on him and work for him than to depend on myself. It's like walking. Everything is my effort as opposed to him bearing fruit through me. And here's another reason that work, the strain is off. It's because simple obedience to him is not a burden because I am so grateful for who he is and what he's done in my life. In other words, the work that I do flows out of gratitude for the relationship that I have with Jesus, which reduces the burden of work. Can you think of a boss that you worked for that you did not like? How was that? Think of how it was working for someone where you didn't like them. Now, can you think of working for someone that supervised you that you did like? And how different that was. Like you're glad to go the extra mile here because of your gratitude for this person. And so we work for the one who created us and saved us and loved us and walks in life with us, and we are grateful to work for him. Listen to the Message. And this is the one where you can't, it's hard to tell what verse it is because they don't have verses. They have groups of verses in the Message. But this is somewhere in here, Matthew 11, 28 to 30. I think it's verse 30 primarily. He writes, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. The unforced rhythm. Don't you love that? Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. So our work for him can be that, free and light, unforced rhythms of grace. And here's another thing about work that makes it easier for Jesus, work for Jesus. That is, the yoke was tailor-made for the ox. It fit just right. Now, my feet are kind of big, kind of long, size 13. Probably not too many people with longer feet. Did you know your feet keep growing all your life? The size keeps going up. Largest foot ever recorded belonged to Robert Wadlow. About 100 years ago, he lived in Illinois. 8'11". That's how tall he was. Now, I see a man fairly often that's 6'7". He's pretty tall, but 8'11". You can't. If he played basketball, he wouldn't even have to jump to dunk the basketball. He just ruined the sport, right? 8'11". He wore size 37 AA shoes. I didn't know there was such a thing. I don't know how they size it that far. And his feet were more than 1.5 feet long. Now, do you imagine that he would go into one of these large men's stores and buy shoes that they'd have his size 37 AA? Or if he went to a specialty shoe shop that they would have his size? I don't think so. Somebody's going to have to make shoes for him that are tailor fit for him. And what I want to say to you is that when God gives you assignments, whatever they are, they're tailor-made for you, assuming they're from him. And what a delight that is. The work that he gives is what he gave just for you. So that also takes the burden away. So those three things reduce the burden of working for Jesus. Number one, it's empowered by him. Number two, it flows out of gratitude for our relationship with him. And number three, it's assigned by him. All right, let's talk about the third kind of rest, inner rest. And we'll look at this again. And we're gonna focus on yoke again here, verse 28 to 30, Jesus' words. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. I'm going to say that again. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. You know, in mentoring Teen Challenge students, several years ago, I started noticing this pattern in the students of the things that they were struggling with, and the same cause of what their struggles were the same cause of my struggles. And it was this. They were taking on things Jesus had not given them. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, this guy over here is favored by the staff. So they get their focus on somebody else that they thought was favored. These rules in this place are so stupid. There's too many of them. Something they had no control over. So these kinds of things, focusing on something other than what God's called us to do, distracts us from what he has called us to do. And it does no good, because you have no control over it. And you're not called to it. So I just thought, this is great. So many of the issues in my own life, I run into trouble when I take on things he's not given me. So, what has he given me? Well, I think it starts with my own growth in him. If I can look at the things I'm facing in my life and say, what are you trying to teach me here? Instead of, why do they do that? You know, somebody outside of me that I can focus on, get angry about or fearful of or something. That's not what he's given me to do. And so here's what simplifies my life a great deal, is I know this is what he's given me to do. My job in life is to glorify God. So if I'll go through my day and a new situation comes up and I can say, how can I honor you now? How can I glorify you now? That's what he's given me. And for me, that takes a whole lot of other stuff off the table. Stuff I add to myself that he hasn't given me. When I was a young pastor. I don't claim to be that anymore, that's for sure. My first pastor, I was in my mid-30s. Is that young? I don't know. Depends how old you are. I had kind of a nervous breakdown. I got up, or I didn't get out of bed one day. I woke up one morning and I couldn't get out of bed. And there was nothing physically wrong with me. Literally could not get out of bed. And I wasn't sure what was going on, but I look back now and I realize at least one of the things that was going on was I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I think my body finally just said, enough, stop. And even then, it's like I needed some time to not work. And the whole time I'm going to get it back to work. I got to be responsible. I got to get back to work. So there's constant driven pressure on myself. I was adding something to my life that Jesus had not given me. And I paid a price for it. Another example of taking something on that Jesus hasn't given us is saying yes to people when they ask you to do something because you don't want to disappoint them. You ever do that? And if you have a habit of doing that, pretty soon your life is really busy because you've taken on all this stuff and you didn't stop and say, Jesus, is this from you? It might be good. It might even be helpful. It might be a loving and serving thing. But to stop and just say, is this what you're giving me? Because I don't know how you've been, but there's been times in my life where I had too much going on. I had to stop and say, what's not from you, at least now, what's not from you anymore that I need to drop because you're not calling me to be this crazy busy. I remember one time I was learning to be a pastor in Eugene, and I was on 23 committees, and I was part-time. I finally had to say, I don't think so. This really, Jesus giving me this much committee work? There's a nurse named Bonnie Ware that wrote about and talked about the 5 most common regrets of dying people because she counseled people who were terminal. And she asked them the question, what are the regrets that you have in your life? And she tallied up 5 common answers. And I won't tell you all 5. You can look it up. Bonnie Ware, if you want to look it up. I'll give you the number 1 most common answer. She put it this way: I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. That was number 1. Now, we would reframe that a little bit from a Christian point of view, maybe, and say something like, I wish I'd lived the life that Jesus called me to, but that last part, not the life others expected of me. Number 1 regret. That's something, isn't it? I don't want to come to the end of my life and say, oops, I lived it for other people instead of what Jesus called me to do. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and I want you to think about them. What have you added to your life that is something that Jesus has not given you to do? It could be an activity or it just could be a mindset. What have you added to your life that Jesus has not given you? And let's just be silent for a minute and see if something comes up for you. And the next question is similar, but the opposite. Is there something that he is giving you that you've not said yes to? So I'll let you sit on that for a moment. Is there something he is giving you that you've not said yes to? So I hope that's helpful. And if the Holy Spirit is speaking to you about something, maybe there's something you should follow up on later today and make some decisions about. But what we want is we want to take on everything Jesus gives us and nothing more. That's where the rest is. Okay? So we've talked about rest from earning God's favor. We've talked about rest as we work and serve. And we've talked about inner rest. And the 4th kind of rest is rest from work. Okay? So we go to Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11. Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11. You're probably familiar with this. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Now, we're in the Ten Commandments here. This is number 4. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male, female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, a lot could be said about the Sabbath. I don't want to preach on the Sabbath and how to interpret it today, but I do want to say this. God was a working and resting God as an example for us. You know what you can be certain of? God's running the universe. I don't have to. You know what that means? The world continues working fine when I stop. Can I trust him enough to stop? I'll never forget when I was first hanging around the Free Methodists at their conferences with pastors and stuff. They were talking about some pastor who had burnt out and was out of ministry, as I recall. And what they said, he'd said was, the devil doesn't take a day off and I'm not going to either. And he burned out. And I've always remembered that. Because I could see that thinking. The devil's always at work. I can't rest. I've got to fight all the time. But guess what? We serve a God who rests. Rested as an example for us, at least in part. And you know what? One day I'm going to die and there's going to be a bunch of stuff on my to-do list still. Right? There's going to be unfinished business and I'm dead. And that's okay. That's just how it is. So one of the questions I want to ask you is, what is it that delights and replenishes you? What kind of rest is really effective in your life? And, we'll start with the obvious here as preaching the word here. Communing with God in prayer and the word, is that restful to you? Is that refreshing to you? What about taking a nap? Yeah, I'll be doing that today. Working out, going for long walks or short walks, having a conversation, reading a novel, going to dinner, engaging in healthy play. What refreshes you? Probably, maybe several of these things. I think it'd be a good idea to write down all the ways that we try to get refreshment and then ask the question, does it refresh me? I have a feeling that if you do that, a lot of people find that feeding on the news it's on the list of the things we do, but it doesn't end up refreshing us. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be informed. We need to be informed. But like you're bored and you want something to do, so you read the news or you listen to the news. And do you come away refreshed? Or you go on social media and spend time because you're shot, you're tired, it's the end of the day, and you just go on social media hoping for a recharge. Does it recharge you? I don't know. I think a lot of people find the answer is no on those things. Wouldn't it be good to have a list and say, here's the things I go to be refreshed. Do they refresh? Am I really getting rest and refreshment from this? Resting helps teach our hearts that we are loved apart from what we do. You are loved apart from what you do. I'm not a doing machine, but a child of God, deeply loved. I didn't earn his love when I came to him, and I can't earn it now. So my friend was sharing with me that he was with a group of first-time climbers, and they were going to climb Mount Hood. The only person that knew what they were doing was the guide. A bunch of newcomers. The guide said to them, normally the standard time to start climbing Mount Hood is 2 a.m. But he said, we're going to start at 3:30 a.m., an hour and a half later than the standard time. and you're going to pass people at the end. Why? How's this going to work? Here's what they did. Step, rest, right from the get-go. First step, climbing this mountain. Step, rest, step, rest, step, rest. Now, I could hear myself, if I were part of this group, saying, I got all this adrenaline. Come on, let's go. And right from the start, we're going to work rest into this? Like, no way. Well, guess what happened? The people that did not do that wore out. The people that worked rest into the rhythm of their walk up Mount Hood actually ended up getting there quicker. In other words, you want to be more efficient? Rest more. Don't you love that? I love that illustration. I just thought that is so interesting that you have to go against the grain. You have to go against your natural inclination, which would say, let's go, especially at the start. Come on, I'm not tired. Why would I be resting? I keep using pastors as examples, but I see that when pastors are desperate for a sabbatical, I'm not judging anybody here, but I often think to myself, a sabbatical is not going to fix it. You're going to be desperate again until you change the daily rhythms of your life in a way that's manageable. And that's true for all of us, I think. So how do you need to build rest into your schedule? Maybe you already do. Maybe you over-rest. But for a lot of us, I think we need to stop and say, it's okay to rest. God's got it. So I close with this. Has the Spirit of God spoken to you this morning in some way? Is there something that he would say? This is something to apply in your life. So again, let's just take a moment and ask that question. God, are you speaking to my heart about something that I need to put into practice here?